Well, good morning. Welcome to Debbie's Back Porch. So glad to have you with us. And I'm super excited. You may know I have been eating and cooking very low carb. And I've been working really hard on trying to perfect a pasta that can be eaten on a low carb, even keto diet, tastes like pasta, feels like pasta in your mouth, and handles like pasta. And with this video, I am reporting to you success. I made ravioli. Looks like ravioli, tastes like ravioli, handles like ravioli. It's so good. And listen, each ravioli has about 2 grams or less of carbs, net grams of carbs, depending on how you prepare it. Before we start cooking, let me remind you, if you like our videos, give us a thumbs up and subscribe. And if you click the little bell icon at the top right, you'll get a notice when we post new videos. Now, let's get cooking. So the secret to this miracle is CarbQuick. And this is something, I have wasted a lot of this over the last 2 weeks trying to figure out this recipe. CarbQuick is a baking flour substitute, and what it lacks is enough vital wheat gluten to make pasta. So I'm adding vital wheat gluten. Now the vital wheat gluten has 4 grams of carbs per quarter cup. That is 1 gram per tablespoonful. The CarbQuick has 6 net grams of carbs per cup. It has a lot of indigestible fiber, but only 6 net grams of carbs. This is 1 tablespoonful of oil. That's 2 eggs that I'll beat. That's 1 tablespoonful of bread flour with a ½ teaspoon of salt. And this is my oil. This is olive oil, 1 tablespoonful. If I have it to do again, I would use 1 whole teaspoonful of salt. This recipe was a little light on salt. And I'm going to use my food processor here. The CarbQuick is a little rough. You can't really sift it. And to make the pasta, I want it to be a little finer. So that's the CarbQuick, the 3 tablespoons full of gluten, the 1 tablespoonful of flour, and the salt. So I'm going to put this all in my food processor. And I'm going to blend it for, 15-20 seconds. Not a whole long time. But I want to, number one, make the whole mixture a little bit finer. And I want to sift it all together. And since you can't sift it, I'm using the food processor. It would take really big holes in a sifter to sift the CarbQuick. It's got some fairly large pieces in it. This is good stuff, by the way. I've been playing with recipes. So I'm pouring in the eggs. And I like it. You just have to experiment. So that's 2 eggs and I'm blending it. And then I'm going to add the oil. So we've got 1 cup of CarbQuick, 3 tablespoons full of vital wheat gluten, 1 tablespoonful of flour, some salt, and a tablespoonful of oil. And we're going to get a batter. And this is nowhere near thick enough to be pasta, but it's where we're starting. And I'm going to turn this out. But first I'm going to show you my dusting mix. Ahead of time, I mixed together 4 parts CarbQuick, 1 part wheat gluten, and blended it up to give myself something to dust the pasta with and to work it in and make it thicker. Now, this is why I said depending on how you make it, the carb count's going to vary. But when you consider that this mixture has only 2 grams of carbs per quarter cup, then you can see that it's not going to vary a whole lot. And I don't know how much we're going to work into it yet. Well, I'll tell you that by the end of this, I worked in about a half a cup. So what you're talking about is 4 additional carbs for the whole batch. And I make great big raviolis, and this ended up making 18. So I sprinkled out some of my mixture, and what I'm going to do now is start kneading this. And you know, one of the reasons that none of the other pasta recipes I tried, and I have to tell you, I've tried a bunch of them. I've really researched it. I've looked at pasta made with oat fiber and coconut flour and almond flour and cream cheese and all kinds of things. And none of them actually came very close to pasta. Well, maybe close, not very close. What they lacked was texture, and you get the texture of pasta by kneading it and developing the gluten. So I've just skipped right on through this. I have been kneading this in the dusting mixture for about 6 minutes. And you really want to work it for about 6 minutes. And yes, you could do it in your KitchenAid. Actually, I tried it in the KitchenAid and it works, but it works better just to do it by hand. And it's not really that hard to do it by hand. You know, if you were really making pasta, we're really making pasta, but I mean flour pasta, then this kneading would be a very important part of creating the texture, the elasticity that you need in order to have a pasta dough that you can manipulate and cut and roll and make into the shapes that you want. And you're not going to get that texture without gluten, and even the gluten is not going to work unless you take the time to develop the gluten. So that's what I'm doing. Now, CarbQuick is not flour. It's a baking mix. It has some leavening in it. So a lot of the steps I'm going to show you are about minimizing that leavening. Now, what we're doing here is working this until we get some elasticity. And you can see that it's starting to fold back, to sort of pull back when I stretch it out. And one of the things that will help that with CarbQuick is to just let it sit and rest for 5 to 10 minutes. See, we've got a little pull there, but it's going to tear. Flour wouldn't tear. If you were making this with flour, it would stretch a lot. And we're not going to get that much stretch with this mixture, but we want to get as much as we can. So you're building elasticity. And I'm going to put this into a ball, and I'm going to just let it sit here and rest for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes, something like that. CarbQuick needs a little extra time to fully rehydrate. So I'm just going to leave it here on the counter, walk away from it. You can cover it if you want to. I'm not going to. And I'll come back in 5. So I'm back. I'm going to put a little more of this baking mix on my hands, and I'm going to knead this just a little bit more and stretch it. And I don't know if you can see the difference, but after the 5 minutes rest, we've got a little bit more elasticity, which is really about all we're going to get using CarbQuick instead of flour. So I'm going to just knead it just a little bit more and kind of show you how much elasticity you're going for when you're making this at home. Assuming you're going to make it at home. I hope you do, because it was really good. I had it for supper, and I'll show you that. Made a little clam sauce. So good. So see this? I'm stretching it, and it'll spring back just a little. You can see that it's much more elastic. And I'm giving a pretty hard push, by the way. So I think we're just about where we want to be. I think that's about all the elasticity we're going to get. Yeah. So I'm finished with this, but I'm going to tell you, you can't really over knead it. If you want to do it a little bit longer and develop a little more gluten, you can. but I think we're just about right. And I'm going to roll it up and put it back into a ball now. And lest you think, I'm playing with it a little bit more, lest you think this is an awful lot of trouble, if you're not a person who makes homemade pasta. See that? You see that spring? If you've not made homemade fresh pasta before, this is no more trouble than making homemade fresh pasta. And the difference in homemade fresh pasta and boxed pasta is, I can't even measure it. It's so good. Such a good texture. And this comes very close to it. So I showed you that little spring back that we've got there. We're going to put this into a ball. Now, as I said, we're going to take steps to sort of minimize the leavening that's in here. And refrigeration is going to be part of that. I want you to see those little white flakes. Somebody asked me about that the other day. They don't go away. That's just part of CarbQuick. So I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to refrigerate it. And don't do this for any less than 4 hours. I'm going to leave it overnight in the fridge wrapped up tight. And then we're just going to come back to this tomorrow and we're going to make ravioli. So it's morning again, and I'm going to make the filling before I actually make the noodles. So that's a little bit of fresh Parmigiano. This is 15 ounces of ricotta. And this is a little bit of minced garlic. You can use fresh garlic. You can use garlic powder. And I have a little bit of a leftover onion here. I have some Italian seasoning. And I failed to show you an egg, but I have an egg. Now, I'm going to empty this ricotta into a colander because I have bought it that had liquid in it, and I don't want any liquid in it. As it turns out, this was wonderful and creamy and velvety and had no liquid in it. But just in case, I always have the colander here ready to catch it. And while it's draining, I'm going to grate up the onion about a thin slice, about a tablespoonful, and the Parmesan cheese about 2 tablespoons full. That was about a half teaspoonful of salt, and somehow I missed showing you the onion going in. It was about a tablespoonful of grated onion with the juice. You don't want any big chunks of onion in this. This is the stuffing that's going to go inside our ravioli. I'm adding a little bit of Italian seasoning. That's about a half a teaspoonful. And I should mention here, this is a double batch of filling. I actually made a half recipe. That's a little red pepper flakes of the ravioli noodles. So this filling would fill 36 of my large raviolis. I have a 2.5 inch cutter. So I'm going to cover what's left and use it later. So when we're figuring the carbs, and I'll have a full carb count, by the way, in the info section. So this is minced garlic. If you're using fresh garlic, you want to put it through, I forget what you call that thing, the press, so that you get the juice out. I put about a half a teaspoonful, mostly of the liquid. Mostly I want the flavor. Here's the 1 egg beaten. And you could just use a half teaspoonful of garlic powder if you want to. And we're just going to mix this together thoroughly. You can get out your mixer if you want to. You don't have to. It's pretty easily mixed. I'm sorry, my little dog is chuffing in the background. She wants my attention. She'll just have to wait. So as we mix this up, now this is pretty thin, but it's going to get refrigerated. And I'm going to add some freshly grated Parmesan cheese to this to thicken it up a little bit. That sort of helps it hold together. If you buy the powdered Parmesan in the little green box, it won't help, which I never buy that anyway. It's just as easy just to grate it up. And that was somewhere between 2 and 3 tablespoons full, about half an ounce. And I've got here 6 or 7 leaves of fresh spinach. And I just washed it, and I'm gonna pull some of these stems off. And then I'm gonna chop it very finely, and to do that I kind of roll it up and then get my very sharp knife. Keep your fingers bent and move them as you go. And you really, really want this to be fine. Just as fine as you can get it. If you have a little device for doing this, use that. I think Ball has a little herb snipper, or you can put it in your little hand food processor. However you do it, it just needs to be very, very thinly minced. And you know, if you don't have fresh spinach, you could use parsley. Italian parsley would work just fine. But I like the little bit of fresh spinach in here. And that also adds just a little bit of texture. Yep. So then we're going to put that in. And then when we get it all mixed up, we're going to cover it and let it sit in the fridge while we work with our pasta, and that's going to firm it up even more. So just remember, this is a double batch of the filling, and you know, I'm cooking just for myself. If you have a big family, you probably want to double the pasta recipe. Once you get the raviolis made, you can cook some of them and save some of them in the freezer. Just put them in the freezer and freeze them, and then put them in bags. So I'm just going to show you the texture here. It will firm up a little, but you want something that's going to stand up on the fork. I'm going to put a little cover on this and put it in the fridge, and then we will get out our pasta. But you know, you want this to chill 30 minutes or so before you actually fill the pasta with it. Now this filling is really low carb. If you want to make a meat filling, it would be no carb. So now we're going to get to the fun part. Here is my pasta dough. After about 12 hours in the fridge, maybe a little bit more. And this is very important. You do not want to try to make this without refrigerating this dough for at least 4 hours. And that's because it helps neutralize the leavening that's in there. I'm going to cut this into 4 pretty small pieces because my pasta cutter, my ravioli cutter, is 2.5 inches square. There are different kinds of ravioli cutters. You may have one that's sort of shaped like an ice tray. You fill it full, you put the little the filling in it and cover it and run over it with a rolling pin, and it gives you 12. You want to make this pasta, this sheet of pasta we're going to make, to fit whatever your cutter is. So I'm going to make 4 sheets of pasta about 3 inches wide. And I'm going to show you this, the texture, how it's changed, how much more elastic it is after being in the fridge. It sort of has the texture of Play-Doh. And that's what you want. You want it to be strong enough to stand up to rolling. Now, the process of rolling this out is actually part of developing the texture. And I'm going to use my KitchenAid roller, and you can do this just exactly as you do normal pasta. You can use a rolling pin if you want to, but you have to roll it really thin. I'm putting a little of the baking mix in here just to keep it from sticking. If you have a manual pasta roller, you can use that. Really, this recipe holds up. Now I've got a Silpat liner here, just because it's really good not to stick. And I'm rubbing some of this baking mixture on here. And then I'm going to start the KitchenAid going on speed 2. Yep, you see, the baking mix is coming out. So I've got that ready to go. On setting 1, you always start pasta on setting 1. So I'm going to run it through setting 1 2 or 3 times. I'm going to abbreviate this. I'm going to do a little time lapse, but I'll show you the important parts. So I want you to look at that texture. If you make pasta already, then you know that's the perfect texture. And if you don't, if you're not familiar with making pasta, it's the perfect texture. So I'm going to fold this over, and this is to get it sort of to the shape I want. I want to make it fairly thin because I only want to end up with about 3 inches wide. And I'm running it through, and I'll run it through 3 or 4 times to get it started. You don't pull it, you're just catching it. And now I'm going to switch it to setting 2. And I'll run it through setting 2. 2 or 3 or 4 times. I think I do it 4 times on setting 2. As you go, it gets thinner and thinner, and you don't have to run it through so much. Now you see, if you wanted a wider piece for a different kind of ravioli cutter, you wouldn't have folded it up so thinly when we were back on setting 1. You would have let it be a little wider. So now I'm going to setting 3. And every pasta roller I've ever seen has these different settings. And we're going to take this up through setting 6 of 7. It might be getting a little sticky there on the end. And if it is, I will lay it down and flip it a couple of times in the baking mix, the dusting mix that I've got made here. So I'll turn it up again. I flipped it. And this is getting thinner and thinner, and it gets stronger and stronger as you work that gluten. And you know, this is looking pretty good. I'm really, really surprised at how well this is holding up to the roller. I've really never found a low-carb pasta, and you may have. I'm not saying there isn't one, only that in my research I have not found another low-carb pasta that would hold up to a pasta roller like this. So I'm going to do the other 3, and then I will be back. So here we go. That didn't take too long. I've brushed the excess dusting mix off of these, and I'm going to choose the 2 that are just a little bit shorter and take my ravioli cutter here and just make a little impression. I'm not cutting, I'm just making an impression to give myself a guide for placing the filling. I think this is easier with the other kind of ravioli maker, but I have this one and I'm not going to buy another one. So now I'm filling it, and you know, I have a little teaspoon scoop and I can't find it. So I'm just taking about a teaspoonful of this and putting it as close to the middle of the impression that I made as I can. And I actually should have gotten out another spoon, but you know, cooking just for myself, I get kind of lazy. And this works fine, but it would have been neater if I'd just gotten out another spoon. So this is going to make 6. I'm going to get 6 out of this strip. As it turns out, I get 7 out of the other strip. Which, yes, that only adds up to 12. But then I'm going to have leftovers of the pasta so that I will run it through again, for a total of 18. So if you were using that different kind of ravioli form, I guess you call it, you would get probably 24 out of this because they're smaller. So now I've got a little bowl of water and a brush, and what I'm going to do, and I'm sorry I cut that bottom one off in my video. You know, I'm my own cameraman. So with this water and this brush, I'm going to moisten around each one of these little dabs of filling. And the purpose of that, of course, is to make sure that the top layer of pasta adheres to the bottom layer and we get a good seal, because you don't want this ricotta cheese coming out in your water when you cook it. So just go through and, without getting your filling wet, be pretty generous with it. All the way up. I'll move that over just a little bit. So here comes the only tricky part in doing this manually. We're going to lightly place this top layer over the bottom layer and allow enough play. See, we're doing it gently and pressing down in between the little dabs of filling. There you go. And yes, it's probably easier if you have one of those nice little forms, but I don't make ravioli enough to justify spending another dime. So I'll use what I've got. And then I'm just going to gently press it down. All the way around. That's just to get my seal. And then I'm going to cut. Now, if you've got good, elastic, kind of tough pasta dough, this is a little bit hard to cut. You really have to give it some pressure, which is one indication to me that this pasta's turned out pretty well. So there you go. Just press it down. You see, that's why I gave myself some guides before I placed the filling on the bottom layer. Make sure we get a seal. I also have a round one of these, but I kind of like the square. If you get any little spots here, just you can pretty much tug on it. It's got a good texture here. So I'm just going to continue on and do the other side too. So they're all made, pretty much made. And I'm pressing again. Got a little bit squeezed out there. You can easily get some air in there, and you kind of want to press it down and shape these the way you want them. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 5 of these for my dinner on a plate in the refrigerator. I'm going to put the other 7 on this Silpat sheet and put the whole thing in the freezer. And just let them freeze, and when they're frozen, here I've got a couple more to clear off. When they're frozen, I'll just take them off the Silpat liner and put them in a baggie, and then I can take them out when I want them. This little bit of waste over here, I'll get 5 more out of that. I still have my roller out. I just don't have enough counter space to do it all at one time. So, but you see, that looks like a pretty nice little ravioli. And the pasta itself is just the perfect texture for working it. And so this is the waste. I'm putting it together in a little ball. If it's gotten soft, if it feels soft to you, refrigerate it again. This is actually just fine. It's not at all sticky. Remember, as I'm working this is low-carb pasta. Each one of these large raviolis, and they are large. I mean, they're at least a half an inch bigger than any other pasta forms you might have, has less than 2 grams of carbs, including the filling. In the refrigerator for about an hour, and then we'll cook them. I have here a pot of simmering water with a generous amount of salt. Here are our raviolis. Do you see that nice thinness? And they've dried out, which is very good for them. It's going to make the texture a whole lot better, more al dente when we cook them. I did not put oil in the water. You can. You don't really need to. I'm adding them into the pan one at a time. You could put 10 in here. It wouldn't be a problem. Bigger pan if you're going to do more than that. So I'm cooking 5 just for me. I'm going to eat them all. And when they start coming up to the top, and we're back up to a nice, not a rolling boil, a kind of a low boil, a simmer, I'll set my timer for 3 minutes. Back here I have my clam sauce reducing. And you know, that's so good. In my next video, I'm going to show you how to make that clam sauce. So you see they're all floating. The water's back up to a simmer. I'm going to set my timer for 3 minutes. And I'm going to flip them over. Now, if you have any experience with making low-carb pasta, I know you're shocked at how well they're staying together at the firmness. I know I was. Let me get that one flipped over. I don't have any ricotta cheese coming out in the water. I don't have any pasta disintegration. I'm just going to let this sit here for about 3 minutes. Get my plate ready. The clam sauce is ready. And the timer is going to be going off here in just a second. Actually, about another 20 seconds. So I'm going to flip these over again. And they're about done. They've held their texture. And one of the reasons they're so nice and firm and thin is because of the refrigeration. There's my plate. I'm going to put a little Parmesan cheese on the bottom of this plate to hold these raviolis when I take them out, because they're going to be kind of slippery. And that's just about 2 tablespoons full of freshly grated Parmesan. And I'm going to take these out and just drain them pretty well. If I had more, I would go ahead to the sink and pour them in a colander, but I don't. I've only got these 5. And so I'm just going to drain them right here in this spider and put them right on top of the Parmesan cheese. And look at that. You know, that's ravioli. And when I say it's less than 2 grams of carbs per ravioli, it's a good bit less. It depends on how much of the dusting mixture that you used, but it's probably much closer to 1.5. And I will give you all of those figures in the info section so that you can make a choice of whether or not you want to go to all this trouble to make pasta. And I did, and it really wasn't that much trouble. It's no more trouble than regular pasta. So I'm going to scoop a little of this. Look at that plate. See, that's just under 10 grams of carbs for that big old plate of food. And this clam sauce, as I say, will be my next video. And it only has about 2 grams of carbs for this whole pan. So you're really staying keto. You're eating pasta. And yes, this is a fairly long video, longer than I usually make. And it was a fairly long process. But just as with anything else, that extra effort that you put into it, you can taste it. So that's the rest of my Parmesan cheese on top. And some parsley flakes and a little spinach for garnish. I'm going to show you this. See how it cuts? It cuts like pasta. It cuts like ravioli. It's got the right texture. See how thin that is? Now, full disclosure, the mouthfeel is just a little bit different. When you put it in your mouth, you have sort of the taste and the texture of whole wheat pasta. It is so good. It's so much better than any other low-carb pasta I've tried. And really, I've wasted a lot trying different low-carb pastas. And this is the results I've been looking for. I hope you try this. Look at that close-up. I hope you like it. And I hope to see you again tomorrow.